The continent's most industrialized economy has faced some trying times in the past several years. The issues that the country faces are not endless, as the case may be, but they are weighty. But there has been some cheering news from South Africa of late. S&P Global Ratings says it is maintaining its positive outlook for the country's economy. One of the big three ratings agency, S&P, says it expects that a net external creditor position and the implementation of some structural reforms could lead to an easing of economic pressures. S&P also affirmed its BB-/B foreign currency as well as BB/B local currency ratings for South Africa, which has not been investment grade since 2020. In May, the ratings agency upgraded its outlook to positive from stable, citing an improved fiscal trajectory. The ratings agency explained that the higher than expected government revenue has supported the fiscal position this year, but fiscal pressures remain. In the country's midterm budget statement delivered in October, the National Treasury said South Africa's budget deficit would shrink more quickly than before, with debt stabilizing at a lower level. Now, joining me is Christie Viljoen, Senior Economist, PwC, South Africa. It's nice to have you join us, Christie.
Good afternoon.
Now, this positive outlook follows an improved trajectory that S&P noted since May. What good things have been happening to South Africa of late to maintain this positive outlook?
Well, the one big thing that S&P obviously looks at is the fiscal situation. You mentioned the midterm budget, which was released in October, and the fiscal numbers look better than the main budget that we saw in February. Revenues look better, so the fiscal deficit looked better, and also the projections for government debt. So that's a very big, important factor for S&P when it looks at sovereign ratings. So overall, the midterm budget had some very good news for South Africa. We've had a large fiscal deficit for quite some time, and we're on a path to narrow that deficit. And what the midterm budget basically said was, this is going to probably happen quicker than expected, which for S&P is very good news.
All right, now, one of the major issues for South Africa has been load shedding and a plethora of other issues. And of course, S&P says it expects government to fulfill its commitments to investors in Eskom by shifting between a third and two-thirds of the power company's debt, that's of about 400 billion rand, onto its own balance sheet. It believes that the government will try its hardest to avoid a distressed exchange. So what are the risks attached to this move?
Yes, so electricity load shedding or planned power cuts is South Africa's biggest economic challenge. We estimate that it cost us about 3 percentage points in GDP growth last year. That could have been about 300,000 or 400,000 jobs. And what has happened in South Africa is over time, the quality of our electricity supply system has deteriorated. And one can understand when you're trying to run a business, if the power goes off 1, 2, 3 times a day, it's very disruptive. If you have to spend money on alternative sources like generators or solar power, it is very costly. In the case of our power producer, Eskom, government said in the midterm budget that it's still working on a plan to transfer a large amount of Eskom's debt to the public sector balance sheet. Now, the intention there is to give the power utility more room to maneuver in its own spending abilities. The finance minister said in February this coming year, we'll probably know more about that plan, because it is a significant amount of money, between a third and two-thirds of Eskom's debt, which would be the total value of debt at the moment is about 400 billion rand. So the risk at the moment is that that process takes longer than expected. We are at the moment in a certain stage of load shedding. In my case, this afternoon at 4 o'clock, my lights will go off, and we all have to take our turns in South Africa in terms of the power losses. And it's really negative for business activity and for the economy as a whole. And as South Africans, we need a resolution much sooner than later.
No doubt that's been a bit of a challenge, the load shedding issue in South Africa. But then S&P noted that there was an improved, higher than expected government revenue supporting the fiscal position this year. But they said that fiscal pressures remain. So what are those pressures that South Africa's economy is facing as of now?
So yes, the good news was that the government has been collecting more revenues than it expected. Maybe it was a bit conservative with its forecast earlier this year, but the revenue situation looks good. On the expenditure side, that's where many of the risk comes in. So the one challenge is the cost of public sector employees. The wage bill is about 1/3 of public spending, and government plan to increase their salaries by 3% this year. At the moment, there's actually a higher offer of 7.5% because tomorrow we will see a nationwide strike in the public sector. So government is already thinking about offering more than it has been budgeting. So there's one of the big pressure points. The other big pressure point is the money that we are still paying over in relief grants to many people that lost their jobs during the COVID-19 pandemic. So at the moment, there are about 7 million South Africans that receive a grant of 350 Rand per month. And there's lots of debate and lots of pressure to increase this and eventually evolve this into some form of basic income grant. And the midterm budget, again, it said in February next year with the next main budget, we'll probably know more about what the plan is for this. And that's a significant pressure point because you have so many people receiving this grant. Any increase is a cumulative, a very large impact on government spending. So those are the two big challenges that we will have to see in the next few months, how they develop and what the impact then is on spending and the budget deficit when we see the next budget numbers in February 2023.
All right, now South Africa has faced a number of strikes in the past few months, especially state-owned entities. The government has announced a wage hike of 7.5%, up from 3%, which seems to be a clear effort by government to try to avert a nationwide strike by public sector workers. So where will the extra money come from? Because the strikes have impacted the economy, but not enough to derail the positive trajectory it seems.
Well, if you need more money, if the government needs more money, there's about 3 or 4 sources that it could come from. One would be if the economy grows faster, then you've got more revenue. That would be the good news item. The next one would be to increase taxes. That's the way it's done the world over. If you increase taxes, you can collect more money. Another option would be to redistribute money from elsewhere. So instead of using money to build a hospital or build a school, buy medical equipment, that money will have to be redirected to the salary bill. And then the last option would probably be to borrow money. If there is more money to be spent on salaries, it means the budget deficit will be bigger and then we will have to borrow more money. So most of those options are undesirable. If you can get more revenue out of the economy without raising taxes, I think that is the best option. The others are really not advisable. And one could argue also not sustainable. So that's part of the pressure point, not only deciding on how much is paid on salaries, for example, but also where does that money come from? Because I think that the risk is that it will have to be taken from somewhere else, and most probably coming from some form of infrastructure investment, where we would be spending less on hospitals or schools or roads and rather channeling that money towards salaries.
Finally, Christie, now there is an expectation that the rating could increase if growth in economic output and, of course, financial consolidation continue on a sustained basis. You've talked about reforms and, of course, with, of course, structural and governance reforms. What should those reforms look like? How do you think it will bring about a positive change?
So as I mentioned earlier, fiscal dynamics is a very important factor when it comes to ratings. Another factor is economic growth in general. And the way you get economic growth a bit faster is to make sure that private companies in particular are able to grow their businesses and invest and employ more people. And that's when we get to the discussion about structural reforms or economic reforms. How can we make it easier for businesses to do business in South Africa, to export, to import, to invest? And two of the key factors that S&P noted and that you can see in almost any analysis of South Africa at the moment is regarding electricity and railway. Now, both electricity supply and services by rail is really, really struggling at this stage. That's well known, but we do have plans in process that are trying to fix this. In the case of railway, there's the intention of adding more private sector operators operators to the general railway system. In the case of electricity, there's the desire and the processes to add more independent power producers as well. So I think S&P is looking at these developments, they're looking at these programs, and they're taking a more favorable view on the medium to long-term outlook and what these developments could mean for the economy and for economic growth, and what that impact would then be on fiscal as well.
Well, I tell you, it's quite nice, Christie, to keep that positive look and keep a positive outlook on what this means for South Africa as it is. Even with the ratings going up, we hope that they can sustain it and bring about reforms that will positively transform and accelerate the transformation that the South African government is clamoring for. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, S&P Ratings Agency, like I said earlier, expects that a net external creditor position and the implementation of some structural reforms by the South African government could actually lead to an easing of economic pressure. And that's what Christie has also mentioned. So like I said, we hope that they will be able to bring critical implementation in these areas to bring about a positive outlook in terms of the ratings, even as S&P has brought out what it feels or believes obtains in terms of the South African economy.